This is Julie Pearson, Little Thunder. Today is January 17th, 2020, and I'm interviewing Jean Richardson for the Oklahoma Women's Artist Project, sponsored by the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at Oklahoma State University. We're in Jean's studio just outside, it's actually in Oklahoma City, I guess, where she creates her colorful, large-scale images of abstracted horses and riders often. Your 40-plus career as an artist has made you one of Oklahoma's most visible painters with a national presence, and there's a book about your life, Turning Home, which offers great insights into your work. I look forward to hearing more about your life and work today. Where were you born and where did you grow up?
I was born in Hollis, Oklahoma. My parents were ranching just across Red River at Dodson, Texas. But the nearest hospital was in Hollis, Oklahoma. So to my mother's great dismay, who was a dyed-in-the-wool Texan, I was born in Oklahoma. But as it's turned out, it is now my home.
Do you have any siblings, and where are you in the sequence?
I'm the oldest. I was born just before World War II, and then my younger brother came along after the war. But that's how I ended up leaving Oklahoma, or Texas, and ended up, my brother is in South Carolina. So I moved to South Carolina when I was 8 or 9 years old, and went to high school and everything there.
What was the creative, your parents both were involved in ranching, as you said.
Yes.
Is that right? Okay.
Yes.
So what was the creative environment like in your home growing up?
Well, actually, it wasn't overtly creative. I spent a lot of time alone, and I imagined. I wandered the pasture, or I played by myself and made up all the characters. So I had a creative home in that I was encouraged to find my own self. My first art lessons were when I was in second grade. A friend of mine, mother, called my mother to see if she would carpool for lessons at the museum. And there were children's art classes at the Witte Museum in San Antonio. And the first day, that was all I've ever done. We walked onto the grounds of the museum. All of the adult artists were out with their easels painting the scenery in the park. And then in our class, we had a live model in a grass skirt and leis that we painted our pictures of her on 18 by 24 inch manila paper and temper paints. And it's just, I've never done anything else or wanted to do anything else the rest of my long life.
What was it, do you think, that just mesmerized you about that experience?
I don't know, just as I was thrilled with what I did. I couldn't believe that I could do that. And then I look now at my children when they were coming along. They wanted to use my supplies. I let them. I wanted them to have the joy of creating something, but they would look at what they did and compare it to what I did. And they never got the thrill that I did. So it made a difference.
What is your first memory of seeing art, however you might define it?
Well, probably that.
Mm-hmm.
That was my first, the children's classes at the museum. Then I always got art supplies for every birthday, Christmas, and I painted every place we went. I remember before I learned how to do perspective, I wrangled over how to do a rendering of something that we were seeing. I tried to do a building, and the lines were all wrong, and I didn't know what was right. But, I've just been doing it so very long.
So no art experiences really in elementary school to speak of?
Well, every teacher I ever had thought I was the best artist in the class. They would let me, I'd get my work done fast, and they would let me draw and paint at the time we had left over. When I was in 4th grade, my teacher, it she was a brand new teacher, had just graduated from college, was teaching the 4th grade. And I did a series of paintings about Robin Hood, and she arranged for me to have a showing at the Richmond County Public Library. So I had my first show in 4th grade, Robin Hood.
That's really pretty amazing. And was this on your own initiative to do a series? And
Well, we were reading, but I, drew all the characters as I pictured them, and I guess she thought they were remarkable, and so she let me had that arranged for me to do.
And how did your folks?
Well, they were proud of me, but they also they went, "Don't you want piano lessons too?" It was not that they were set that they couldn't see any way I could ever be an artist. There was no way. They wanted me to learn how to type and where I could get a job, and I never did.
So they moved to South Carolina, I guess, around the time you started high school. What were your art experiences there?
Had a great art program and a great art teacher. She was, I guess we'd now call her a spinster, but she was a delightful person. And she provided art classes all 4 years of high school. So I got to take an art class for credit every year of high school. And then she also allowed me to come to the art room during my lunch hour, so I got to paint 2 hours a day. So it was great. And then I got a...
And that's what you did every lunch hour?
I did. Well, sometimes. But yeah, it's like I had double. My problem was always having enough materials, and that's what having an art teacher who cared about you, she would provide, things that I couldn't have.
Right. There's kind of a difference between falling in love with the medium, but also starting to think of yourself as an artist. And I wonder how old you were when you started to think of yourself as an artist.
I don't think I ever did. I thought I was trying to be an artist, but I didn't realize that I had arrived for a long time. The shock that I had the first time I was judged in a show to be a professional, and I was judged to be a professional because I taught art in high school, but I didn't consider myself a professional. And I entered this show, and they said, "Oh, you've got to be in the professional division." Oh, didn't know.
What show was that?
It was, I think it was State Arts. It was in Nashville, Tennessee. I lived in Nashville for a while. And they had, at the state fair, they had a competition for artists. And so I was going to enter it in the oils division. And because I'd been a high school teacher, I had to be a professional.
Now, as I understand it, you ride horses. You have a childhood connection to horses.
Well, we had, my grandfather on my mother's side had a big ranch between San Antonio and Laredo. And there were horses always around. But I didn't ride as a sport. It was just kind of, that was work to be done.
So for your folks as well as with your grandfather, or, okay, yes.
And then when my children came along, they had horses. So.
But you had that close connection to
Yeah.
horses.
Yeah.
You went to Wesleyan College in Georgia. What did you get from your art education there?
I was a fine arts major, and I had a very traditional education. Freshman year, you could not do anything in color. Everything was in black and white, drawing, chalk, painting, everything had to be in values. And then the next year, you got to add color. I had to turn in 10 drawings a week of hands and feet. So I did my own feet and my roommate's feet. anyway, it's, a rigorous tradition.
Good foundation.
Mhm.
Did you also get a teaching degree?
No,
Okay.
I got just a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and I taught always on a temporary certificate because I didn't have an education degree. So I would teach, and then I wouldn't know if I would be hired next year. Sort of like what's happening in Oklahoma now, the temporary certificates. And I did that because I wanted all studio art rather than the education courses.
Right. So what happened after you graduated from college?
Well, I started teaching. I, for a while, was in Louisville, Kentucky. My first husband was in graduate school, and I taught at Seneca High School in Louisville, big inner city high school. And then a few years later, moved to Tennessee, and I taught in the YMCA children's courses, and then later, I've always had my hand in teaching until the last, say, 40 or 50 years. My early years, I taught enough to afford to be able to do my own work.
Right, because while you're teaching, you're still doing your own painting.
Mm-hmm. Always.
Always.
Sometimes on porches or, on the floor, the dining room, or I never had a studio per se, but I was always doing my own work.
And you also had a stint at the Art Students League.
Yes, in the 70s, I went to New York for 3 months and studied at the Art Students League. And that's at that time, I don't know about how it is now, but you could just sign up and pay and sign up for the teachers you wanted. And so I got a little bit of that experience.
Your first time in New York,
Mm-hmm.
what was that like?
Well, I had been to New York. My mother was a buyer for a department store,
Okay.
and she would go on buying trips, and I would go and stay in her room. So I had been to New York a lot, but I'd never worked there.
I
Or was in
see.
the art scene. I was just always.
Once your folks left the ranch, when you were in
Yes.
South Carolina,
So
so
they
she
left the
started.
ranch. They stopped ranching and any form of that when World War II.
Okay.
My dad, we moved to San Antonio because he got his draft card, and then my grandparents were near San Antonio, so we were there during the war, and then after the wars when they both went into other careers. She was in marketing and a buyer for a department store, and he was in insurance, and so
Right.
they weren't ranchers any longer, but
Right.
it's just the roots.
Right. So you're living in Kentucky and Nashville. How do you end up coming back to Oklahoma?
My first husband after he got his graduate degree, we moved to Tennessee and then to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. And then he transferred to Norman. And so that's how I got. And then we split when I'd just been in Norman 5 or 6 months. And rather than go back to where I was from or back to my parents, I just stayed in Oklahoma. It's kind of a sad period. I wouldn't like to dwell on that.
Right. But
That's how I got
you
back.
came to Oklahoma City, kind of.
Yeah.
You gravitated towards
Yeah.
that. And how many children did you have at that time?
I had 3 children. They were young. My youngest was 2 years old. So I was a single mother.
Right. Teaching and painting.
Mm-hmm. I taught at the firehouse in Norman, and then when I came up to Oklahoma City, I taught a class at Pirates Alley, and I got enough, teaching income by teaching twice a week to maintain, my own work.
Mm-hmm. What was your subject matter at that point in your life?
Well, my subject matter has been the same through all the years. In college, I did a large painting of racing horses, abstract. And so, I did that from way back. but I also did figures and abstract landscape. And those three things, I had a professor one time said, when you don't know what to do, go outside and look at nature. And I did that. I would, go and find the color of a wheat field with the sky dark in the spring. Just the color and inspiration from nature. Tried to translate that into my paintings.
Mm-hmm. And how about the size of your paintings at that point? Are you working large while you're painting, raising your young children?
No, not that large. I would say that, well, at one time I was painting on masonite. I would go to the lumber yard and buy a 4x8 sheet of masonite and cut that into 2 or 3, and then gesso the surface and then paint on that. And so that meant I could do larger. And I didn't use stretch canvas at that time. I was working on these large boards.
Mm-hmm.
And I never did have the money to really frame them, but they were stiff enough I could lean them up and show them off. And I sold a lot of pieces that I had done on those.
On masonite.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I loved what I read about you putting your children on the floor when you were working sometimes because you wanted them to feel included. And I'm wondering how that might have impacted your painting as well, just painting on the floor.
Working on the floor, I don't know how I did it now because I would hurt leaning over and being on the floor. But for years and years and years, that's how I worked. And I don't know how.
You sort of are free to move around, just.
Oh yeah. The amazing thing to me, having been around all these grandchildren now, is how my children never got in the paint. They just grew up with it from the time they were in an infancy, and they never, caused a problem.
They knew not to.
They knew not to without me having. And it was also, I could kind of zone out doing what I'm doing, and they would be there telling me things, and and it was a lot of time spent with my children. So,
what Oklahoma artists have you made connections with at this point?
well, I got to know Jean Babinger, who was in the OU art department in Norman. He and I shared a booth at the Oklahoma Arts Festival one couple of years. And he would stay with the paintings one afternoon and I would do the next. But my paintings got to be too large to, one painting would take up a whole booth. And I quit doing that. But I, for a long time, half of my yearly income was from outdoor arts festival.
Outdoor Arts Festival. When did you do your first festival and what was that experience like?
Well, I did one in Tulsa. If I had my scrapbooks, I could tell you exactly when it was. But what is the art fair in Tulsa?
Mayfest?
Mayfest. I was in Mayfest.
That was one of your first outdoor art festivals?
Yeah.
And what was that experience like for you?
It was great. My picture was in the paper. It was good. I got a lot of good feedback.
And they had a competition show as well. So did you enter the competition?
Yeah. And I was in the Plaza Art Fair in Kansas City and won a ribbon in that. So I got some recognition by participating in those
Yes.
outdoor.
Right. And you're acquiring some collectors along the way. So one of your first professional breakthroughs, I guess, was in the 1970s when you landed those mural commissions from the State Arts Council. Can you talk about how that came about?
I'd been doing a series I called Oklahoma Album, and I was doing black and gray figures over a neutral abstract background, and using sort of, I called them spit and whittle. There were courthouses and pool halls and things like that, and I painted them to look like an old photograph. And so I had shown those around some, and one of the architects that was doing the state capitol, that were redoing the conference rooms, asked me to do these murals. And so I did very large scale. They were larger than that canvas. And they're still there.
Yeah. Yeah, they look really interesting. And I also read that at one point you went on a trip with your children. You were kind of exploring some Oklahoma landscapes. What were your reasons for making that trip?
Well, I did lots of trips.
Okay.
I would just put them in the car, give them stuff to do. We would go and I would do a scene or find people sitting around. There's one in the state collection that I did in Watanga, and just somebody on the street. Now, I did lots of just getting out and in that period, that
Exploring.
Oklahoma period.
Yeah. So it wasn't in connection with the murals, though, necessarily.
No, because I had that, that's why I got the invitation to do the murals, because they were...
because you had done that research and exploring.
I worked with George Shirk, who was the former mayor of Oklahoma City. He was a big in Oklahoma history, on delving into the things that I depicted in the murals, the history and everything. I was really into it.
And what was your impetus for just starting those trips around Oklahoma?
Well, it's when I first moved back, I hadn't, lived here in my high school and college years, so it was really reacquainting myself with the family roots.
Mm-hmm. What was one of your more important gallery breakthroughs?
Well, the 26 East Gallery in Tulsa showed my work. I think they found me at the Mayfest, and I had several shows there over the years. And then I showed at the Norman Wilkes Gallery here in Oklahoma City. And then my first really big breakthrough was in Santa Fe. And I was doing, at that time, I had started doing a series of mounted figures, which were because of a collection of Curtis photographs that I had in my possession at that time. And I tried to get the same feeling that Curtis got with the silhouetted mounted figure in a lonely or tranquil setting. And I tried to say, can I get that same feeling but with bright colors? And so I'm playing with that. And I had a show in the little museum in Ardmore.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody said, those would be good in Santa Fe. So I had 5 or 6 36 by 48 canvases in that series, and I tied them to the top of my Subaru, and my 7-year-old son and I went to Santa Fe, and I parked him and went in to a gallery and said, would you like to see my paintings? And they usually say, oh, we don't need anybody right now, but this person wasn't busy and said, well, bring them in. And well, can you leave them? We'll try it. And that was it.
That's great. And the name of the gallery?
It was, at that time, Entheos Gallery on Paseo de Peralta. And I was in that gallery for 10 or 15 years. And then it closed, and I've since then been at Ventana Gallery on Canyon Road.
Right.
A wonderful, wonderful gallery.
You know, your subject matter, of course, your style is abstracted, a little bit modernist, those bright jewel colors, but it also falls within Western art has been very narrowly defined for a long time, and that definition has expanded a lot. Can you talk a little bit about the dance or whatever that happens? I mean, I'm wondering how many quote-unquote Western art shows you do, or how that's played out with your work.
Well, actually, people try to put you in a category, and I don't quite fit in any one, which is okay with me. I don't mind, I don't want to be apologetic for going back and forth between abstract and realism. The point at which that changes is exactly what I'm looking for. I want it to be almost not there, but just a hint. And that point is what I try to do in every painting. So I'm not trying to dodge whether I'm a Western painter or not. I just think it's hard to put that defining point.
Right, especially when your goal is so different. How did you meet your second husband?
I was having my first show in Oklahoma City, and a friend of mine who'd been taking lessons from me at Pirates Alley said, I have this interesting man. He's interested in the arts. And I said, no blind dates, no thank you. She said, well, it's not a date. I'm just having a dinner after your show, and I'm going to invite him. And it was perfect.
That's neat. You did a Native Dancers series for a while. Can you talk about that a little bit?
That was from my teaching years. I mean, I was teaching in my studio, and I had a Native American man who took lessons from me, and he was the moderator at a lot of powwows. And so he invited me and told me the rules. You don't bid on the blanket, and you don't sit in anyone else's lawn chair, and all the things.
Etiquette.
And I went to a lot of wonderful powwows. I went to one in Colony, and I went to, anyway, all around. And I love the color and the motion and everything.
And those were done in, what were the years? The 80s?
Probably early 80s.
Mm-hmm. When did you really begin focusing on larger formats, and why?
I always expanded to what my vehicle would hold. If I had a Subaru that was 50 inches wide, that's how wide my paintings were. If I had a Dodge cargo van, that's how big my paintings were.
So your vehicles have gotten bigger. As you know, women are underrepresented in all the fields of the arts. I'm wondering how that's impacted your career.
I've been on several panels addressing that, and my feeling is that I had some advantages, actually, because it was not expected of me to, I didn't have to do a career where I could make a salary to support a family. I was able to do what I wanted instead of if I had been thinking about careers as a man, I think I would have had fewer options. Also, it was a blessing to me to be able to be with my children all the time, instead of, if I worked downtown and had to have daycare. So I had some very good things about being a woman artist. There was not a lot of mentorship, and I don't know if that has changed a lot, but there weren't women artists to look up to very much. Most of the ones that I knew about were either lovers of, or wives of, or daughters of male artists, not any that just on their own. Mm-hmm. So that there's that, lack of seeing what a woman artist could be. Never had anybody that I could really look at for that. Mm-hmm. I looked at some of my teachers, art teachers, but none of them had families. There were things about that life that I saw that they had that I didn't want. So anyway, I would say that I'm not a dyed-in-the-wool feminist when it comes to art things. I think that women have some privileges.
There are some pluses too.
Yeah.
As you began acquiring more galleries and doing more shows, how did you balance traveling versus painting? I mean, when you're traveling and doing shows, it is.
I had always, in my budgets, I always had enough for somebody to help me with the babysitting. a couple that would stay when I needed to go somewhere. Also, my husband would do it. Also, my parents would come and stay if I had a long trip or engagement. And often I just took them with. So, I don't know. It was, I found support as I needed it.
What's a compliment you got on your work at some point that was especially important to you?
They were surprised that I was a woman. They thought I painted like a man. No, really, people either they feel something when they look at my paintings, or they don't. I have people say, "Oh, it's very nice. Do you paint anything besides horses?" If you don't like horses, you don't, get what I'm doing. So I don't worry about it. You have to have kind of a thick skin sometimes.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What kinds of printing do you do? Have you done?
When I was in the gallery in Santa Fe, I had a very good show there, and a woman from New York contacted me about showing in her gallery in New York. And so we had a meeting with my dealer in Santa Fe and that person. And they kind of said, well, that would be good for the work in Santa Fe if you've had a show in New York. So I had a show at the gallery in New York. And that gave me some exposure nationally that I would not have had just as a regional.
Mm-hmm. And what year is that approximately?
That was maybe 83,
Mm-hmm.
84. I did a lot of posters during that time. And because of my show in New York, the publisher, John Zoki, asked me to do some prints. And I said, well, I'm not trained in printmaking. I hated printmaking in college. I spent all year grinding the stone instead of doing what I wanted to do. I hated it. And he said, well, you need to do, it's like a performing artist. You don't get people to come to your concerts if you don't have records. And that's passe now, there are no records anymore. But he considered the printmaking to introduce to a much greater audience that I could do one canvas at a time. So he paid for me to go and learn to do these things. I did a series of monotypes at a studio in Palo Alto. And then I had a printer in Brooklyn who did work with me making prints. And for about 10 years, I made a lot of prints for John Zoki. And it was fun to learn something in mid-career, but it wasn't ever really
what you love.
What I love.
Mm-hmm.
He did the book, which has been a great boost to my career to have a well-written book at your midpoint,
Right.
instead of after you're gone.
Yes, and it's a very good book. So your work's pretty physical, and I'm wondering if there's anything you do besides painting to prepare for it.
No, I've had art students who work for me and help around the studio in the summers, and they're always amazed at how I can stand up for 8 hours. They're tired, these young 20-somethings, and I'm used to my daily routine, which is a lot of walking and standing and moving and lifting and.
Right, and you're standing, but you're painting flat often on these bigger
moving. I'm never sitting.
Yes, right. Do you have any projects right now that you're up and coming projects you're excited about?
No, I have a show in the summer at Ventana, and I've just had.
Is it during Indian Market?
No, it's in June.
Okay.
And then I've just finished a show at JRB Gallery here in Oklahoma City, which was a very nice. So I just maybe once or twice a year I have something special, and the rest of the time I'm just sending new work to the galleries which are already established.
Right. And you still have a show up at Royce Meyer's Gallery too.
Yeah, they show my work all the time, but I haven't had a one-person show this year.
I see.
I had one last year. I don't mind it not being a one-person show though, because I think it helps to have 2 points of view on anything.
Right, right. And it's a tremendous responsibility to put out
Yeah,
one
that
person
much,
show too.
yeah.
So you have a studio assistant. How has that helped you in your work?
Well, I get to do all the things I like to do, and I don't have to do all the things I don't like to do.
You actually have a couple. I mean, you have.
Well, my daughter-in-law helps me with the photography,
Okay.
and Raphael helps me with the stretching and shipping.
Right.
And I have a studio dog. You may see his beds and toys all around.
I haven't seen him. How has your choice of colors changed over the years, do you think?
It changes all the time because I'll go 4 or 5 pieces in, and then they all look like they were painted on the same day. I've got to have something different, and so I purposefully put out different colors to see if I can, but it happens gradually. I've been into black and white the past 2 or 3 months.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we'll get to see a little
Yeah.
example of that at the end. And what do you like about painting in a series? You started that really early.
I look at each painting as being like just a word in a long poem. So I'm not trying to give a whole essay or novel in a single painting. It's just one little word. And I can edit that out and do another and another. And so I think all of my work is in a series. And once I look back and say, that was the Oklahoma exploration series. It's almost looking back. It's not that I decided to do that. I just said, that was what I was thinking about then. But I don't intend and set out to do a series. It just, it's organic.
Do you title individual paintings or do you just title the series?
Entitled individual paintings. And I spend a lot of time working on that. I have thesaurus, and I will give a basic idea of what I think it looks like. And then I'll look for the synonyms and the alliteration, and I just sometimes, it's a struggle to come up with a new one never used.
Yes.
But that's a challenge.
Well, talking a little bit more about your process and techniques, can you sort of take us through your painting materials and your process?
I mentioned that I liked learning something new in mid-career, but I'm being forced to learn new things in late career because all the artist materials that I have been used to all these years have changed when they're all manufactured in China now.
Including acrylics.
Everything. The canvas pliers that I stretch the canvas, the colors, the charcoal, everything has changed. They still call it the same, but it's made a different way, and I'm having to deal with those physical differences. Something I have done for 30 years now is a different, drawing time, or it's very technical. But having to work around change, when you're 80, you have to learn how to do something you knew how to do at 20. So it's a challenge.
Do you do any preparatory sketching directly on the canvas, or how do you?
I have, you want me to show you my big charcoal sun drawing with the large soft charcoal.
Right.
That it scrubs off or it disappears into the paint, so it's not permanent, but I do some sketching.
That's
but I
outside.
start not from a drawing, but from laying in of colors and design.
Gotcha. And then often you, are you using a palette knife too, right?
Yes.
Are you getting...
I get those mostly from Home Depot. I just get spackling knives.
Okay. Yeah, and it adds a really neat texture and dimension to painting. You also explored sculpture for a little bit. Can you talk about that?
Well, whenever I wanted something in my yard or in my studio, I just made something, and I didn't try to show it or sell it. I just did it for myself. And then John Zocchi, my publisher in New York, paid for me to go and work with a French sculptor in bronze. And I had 2 editions of bronzes that he did, and all I got out of it was just my artist proofs, but it was great fun. I found that I could make my look with clay as well as with paint. It was fun.
Oh, wow.
But I haven't, that's a very expensive
So those were
thing to do.
horses that
Yeah.
the resulting.
Yeah.
Neat. Can you talk about how you, where the placement of both your signature and your titles, because that's a decision to make.
My first gallery in Santa Fe said that my print signature, Richardson and block print, was not professional, and they wanted me to do a brushed signature, and I had to learn how to do that. So you can date my paintings from whether they have a block print signature or a cursive signature. So there's that. I usually put it in the, do it in the lower right-hand corner, and I do it in other places if it absolutely needs something in a different corner. Then I write the name of the painting on the back of the stretchers.
Okay. What is your creative process, beginning with the time you first get an idea?
I don't get an idea and then start. I start and then get the idea. I begin just by putting something on a canvas. I don't start with an idea that then I execute. The first thing that I put up there suggests something else, then I add to that, and then I say, oh, I could do this. So it just is a process.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't start in my head, it starts in my hand.
Gotcha. And you keep a notebook of sketches and or
Yeah,
ideas? Or
I have 50 years of sketchbooks. You can see grocery list and timetables and all kind of things in there too, but just years and years of sketching wherever I've been.
if you're at a show or outside and you just...
Yeah.
Do you ever draw upon those notebooks for inspiration too?
Yes, sometimes like when I go to a museum, I'll take my sketchbook and I will say, very interesting cerulean blue against raw umber. And so those kind of notes will lead me to try that kind of combination later. And I can go back, they're all references. I keep 4 or 5 going at one time.
What's your creative routine? Like how you work, schedule, etc.?
Well, now that I'm alone, I just come whenever I wake up, bring my studio dog, start the fire, turn on the music.
You work to music.
I also listen to a lot of public radio, so I'm very involved politically because I hear it 4 hours a day.
Right. Well, looking back so far, what's been an important fork in the road moment for you, do you think?
One was getting a fine arts degree instead of a certificate. That was a fork. when I was a single mother deciding to try to make it with teaching and painting instead of getting a job as a fork, decided to take my work outside of Oklahoma. You know, I already kind of had done things in Tulsa and Oklahoma City and all around the state, but taking it to a new place was a fork. And of course, my first show in New York was a definite, but I didn't create that, but it was a happening to me that changed a lot for me.
Yes, because it led not just to the book, but the prints and the sculpting, etc. You've had 2 different studios. The studio that you're in now, I'm wondering, and it's just beautiful, how much of a hand you had in planning it or designing it.
I designed this studio sort of with the same spaces I'd had in my studio in town. I was in an old lumber shed, and I loved the space and I loved what I did there, and I tried to duplicate that here. I couldn't have conceived of the roof or anything. I could do the floor plan, but I had to have help from an architect friend to do the rest of it. But I'm very pleased. I mean, it's been a great benefit for me to be at home, because for all the years that I went to town, I didn't see what was going on here in this most beautiful. Now I watch birds. I just saw a coyote go by a few minutes ago.
Neat.
I have lots of things to see and do. Enjoy being in nature, and I don't call it aloneness. I call it solitude, and I like it.
What's been one of the high points of your career?
Well, the first show in New York.
What's been a low point so far?
Well, it's not a career low point, it's a personal low point of losing my husband. That's been rough, but I'm grateful for my career because it gives me some great therapy.
Is there anything else we didn't get to talk about that you'd like to talk about?
I can't think of. You've been very thorough.
Well, we're going to take a look at some specific paintings, so we'll just pause them.
I would say that I served 2 terms on the State Arts Council, where we did the funding for arts programs across the state of Oklahoma. And because of what I was able to do as a 7-year-old child in a museum in San Antonio, and what I was able to do in a good high school art program, those things are important to me for every child in Oklahoma, to have a museum they can go to have art classes where they study. And unfortunately, our state has let a lot of that go, and it's important to me personally and important for me to be as active as I can to correct that for other children. Because I know there are little children out there in Hollis, Oklahoma, who never have the chance that I had.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and we'll pause and get ready to look at these paintings. Can you talk to us about this painting?
This piece is still in progress. I'm trying to get a brushing herd. I've entitled it Tableau, and I'm using washes of darks with white brushwork overlaying it.
Great. And how about this painting?
This painting is called Shadow Lee, L-E-A, and it's an older piece that I've saved for myself because I really like it. I like the white fog that I've kind of let come across the legs.
Yeah, and it's got lots of neat texturing with the
foreground textures sort of are the meadow or the pasture.
Right, right.
Still, I let the background be the movement. When the
Mm-hmm.
horses are the movement, I let the background be still.
Oh, yeah. Yes. That works really well. Okay, and this figurative painting over here?
That was a figure study that I did from the model years ago.
Yeah, it's really interesting, and you have done quite a few figurative
Yes.
pieces of people. Thank you for your time today, Jean.
Well, it's been great to have you in the studio.